Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Sharon Messmore. I am the Products and Services Coordinator with CUES. And today we are glad to have Trace Ledbetter and Loren Shelton from State National joining us. Just a few reminders as we get started. Today's webinar is being recorded, and the recording and the slides will be sent out in a follow-up email afterwards. And if you have any questions, you are muted, so please use the chat option or the Q&A in order to ask those questions, and we will get to them at the end of the session. So again, as I mentioned, Trace Ledbetter and Loren Shelton are here to join us. Trace directs and oversees delivery of all services and products for lender services, including customer relationship management, underwriting, and claims for State National. And Loren manages the underwriting, claims, and new business implementations for a portfolio of over 6 million loans. With 15 years of experience, he has extensive knowledge in State National's products. So welcome and thank you for joining us.
Hi, I'm Loren, by the way. Today's agenda, just very briefly, Trace is going to have some comments on the psychology of change. We're going to have hopefully an interactive discussion on the challenges of 2020 and the evolution of our business and client services. And then we're going to end with Client Advisory Council members. We've got a white paper on that for some lessons learned. In between, we're going to have some polls, and I think I'm going to turn it back over to Sharon at this point because our first poll is going to happen now.
And while Sharon pulls that poll up, my name is Trace Ledbetter. I'm the VP here at State National. And as Loren mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about change today, and certainly something we've all been forced to refamiliarize ourselves with this year, as 2020 has been an eventful year, to say the least. I recently had the opportunity to participate in another interview with Matt Johnson, who is the Director of Change Management at Markel, which is our parent company. And, it was interesting hearing him talk about change. And I started doing some other research on it because, as I mentioned, this has been such an interesting year. And one of the things that I found as I started looking at it online is, really this change management and change theory began taking place in kind of the 50s with the Lewinson model. Which, and at that time in the 50s, if you think about the way organizations were structured, I mean, they kind of operated in a fixed environment. They would make a change, then they'd go back into kind of a frozen mode. As I was thinking through the various change theories, trying to figure out which one seemed to resonate the most, that one really didn't seem to fit for that reason. I looked at McKinsey stuff, McKinsey 7S, that started kind of in the 70s and 80s as some of the change management theory was kind of accelerating. That seemed to be a very linear model where each stage was dependent on the prior stage, which can make it very complex to implement, but also it takes a lot of time. So that also didn't seem to really kind of resonate with where we are today. Another one was the Posky-Adkar method, which, seems to work in times where there's incremental.
Are you making that up?
Not yet, but I will get there. But it was interesting because so much of these models contain things that we just deal with every single day. Change is a constant. There's everything around us is always changing. It's a state of change. A lot of it we all learn to do instinctively. And so it was interesting going through these models. There was pieces that, I recall learning back in high school or college, but really kind of seeing it all crystallized and thinking through how it applies. The Kubler-Ross method was another one, and that was originally created by psychologists to deal with grief, the various stages of grief. And I think that there's some element of that that's applicable. As Matt Johnson mentioned, people don't really resist change. That's not what drives the behavior. It's the sense of loss that drives the behavior. So for that reason, I think there's some stuff in the Kubler-Ross method that makes sense. The other one that I thought really resonated was the Cotter 8, which is a bit more of a visionary. the downside to that method is it tends to be top-down driven, which in today's environment for 2020, the pace at which we entered this change kind of broke that downside and really made it to where, while you had to have that vision and how to solve some of the challenges that we've all been faced with, it became very dependent on communication and the upward flow of information through organizations, which again was kind of the downside of the Carter 8. But this scenario, I think, really kind of made that to where it resonated. And again, that sense of, kind of air quote normalcies that we all had become accustomed to kind of got thrown out. And, the Carter 8 really kind of lent itself, in my mind, to being very agile and being able to respond quickly. So as we continue to go through this, we'll talk some about the client advisory council that we had and some of the process that we went through with them. But, again, part of adapting this change and really being agile, I think, has been a big part of 2020 for us as an organization. And I know some of our clients as well.
I'm still trying to figure out how you know all that stuff.
You know what? It's amazing what all is out there, and a little bit of research can be very informative, and not necessarily for whole new information, but to reinforce what we already instinctively know.
I guess I'm more of the instinctive guy because I don't know how to put a name to it, but we certainly had plenty of opportunities to implement change earlier this year, and I don't think we were in any way unique in that situation. But we had some very practical applications that we had to solve. We went from an office environment where for the people that are located here in Bedford, about 98% of them worked from our office. And we went from that environment on a Monday to, by the time Friday ended, about 95% of our employees worked remotely. And it was a very fast transition. In fact, it was much faster than even management had anticipated, because when people got on board, they got on board. And overnight, we had a new set of problems that we had never had before. We had to solve things in different ways. And so by taking all of our employees and pushing them out and having them work from home, it had ripple effects into the organization. For instance, we had claims processes, very rigid claims processes that we do the same thing over and over and over. And now, because we're not physically located together, those processes come along, and it's very obvious very quickly where your problems are, because, well, this process depended on this person printing this report and then delivering it down the hall to this person. Well, that's not happening anymore. So we had opportunities to look at things saying, do we really even need to do that? And really, I was amazed at how many things kind of got impacted, and we didn't have all the answers at first. We didn't even know what the questions were at first. And so it gave us opportunities every day to look at what we were doing and say, does this make sense? Is this the right thing to do? And, we really kind of, I don't know that I'd say we went overboard, but we really emphasized making our employees be comfortable. It's this pandemic environment, and we want them to be safe. We want them to be comfortable. We want them to have the tools that they need. And we really kind of focused on that early. But it didn't take very long. Once we thought we had a handle on that, we switched our focus, because what's good for our employees isn't necessarily always good for our clients. And so we had to balance those things between the needs of our employees and the needs of our clients. Because at the end of the day, if we don't make our clients happy, there's no point in any of us working.
Yeah, and that really, I guess the difference between agility and flexibility, being agile enough to respond to the business needs and still be able to successfully deliver the outcomes that our clients need is very important. But also being, as you mentioned, being flexible enough to keep employees engaged and motivated and everything. So it was I think it was a very interesting time early on. In a lot of ways, that kind of energized me, that change. I found exciting.
There are days I wish we lived in less interesting times. I'll tell you that. Talking about the flexibility, we needed to do some things in ways that we had never done them before. And, it's very standard, very trite to say, well, we've always done it that way. And as much as we like to think that we're cutting edge and innovative, there's a lot of that. We've always done it that way in every organization. And you don't even realize how much is there until you're forced to address it. And so this gave us a great opportunity and forced us to address some things. We had, the talking point there is policy versus practice. We're an insurance company. We're highly regulated. We have official forms that need to be filed and approved with the state. And you've got to use these things. Well, our policy forms don't fit a COVID situation because it's causing us to have issues with our clients, and it ultimately means we might wind up doing the wrong thing for them. And let me give you an example of that. Some of our policy forms, if you have a skip coverage, it requires a delinquency. It has to be so much delinquent, but not over, let's say it's 90 days, but not over 180 days. Well, we had a lot of states that basically put moratoriums on repossessions. They said, you can't go out and you can't repossess. So those delinquencies started building because they couldn't even file them at 90 days. It wouldn't do any good. And so we started looking at it. It's like, well, can we practice something that's a more favorable for the client? And so one of the first things we did is we extended that time period an extra 90 days to say, okay, we're going to go out from, it's got to be at least 90, but now it can be up to 270 days past due. So things like that, where we looked at our policy form. Another one was when we look for skips, it's always been our practice when we find a vehicle to pick it up. I mean, you're already there, you already found it, just pick it up already. Well, that's not possible. We could still find the vehicle, and I'm going to pick on some states, California, Michigan, Illinois. Those are the states that kind of lock things down. There were more than that, but those are some of the big ones. And so you find a car in California, and it's not really practical, or it's not really helpful to our client to say, yeah, we found it, go pick it up on your own, whenever
Which
you're
they
able.
couldn't do. Yeah.
They couldn't do that. So part of that, then we had an opportunity to proactively reach out to our clients and say, do you still want us to actively pursue this claim that you filed? Because now there's the possibility that we're going to wind up in this bad situation. And many of our clients appreciated the fact that we were proactive in this, and we gave them the opportunity to pull back those claims and say, you can refile those later when things open up again. But they didn't want to be the bad guy and go repossess somebody's car where they needed it to get to work, or they needed it to go to the grocery store or buy medicine for their family. The bad PR from that wasn't worth finding the vehicle for them. And so we worked with them in those circumstances. We had opportunities to do things, to go above and beyond, because everybody's in this situation that nobody's experienced before. And so, we don't have people in the office. Well, guess what? Our credit unions, our clients, they didn't have people in the office either. And so there was that period of time where nothing was happening because they were focused on them and they didn't have time to deal with the insurance piece. So when things got back, how do you go get a car appraised when you don't have an appraiser that's going to go find that? And one that sticks out in my mind particularly was a car that the owner had driven it out into the swamp in Louisiana. I mean, he had a good time getting his big old pickup truck out there, but you get out in that muddy water, and pretty soon it's buried up to the axles in mud, and there's no driving it out of this. And by the time the car was located, the swamp had started reclaiming it. I mean, there's plants growing in it and things like that. Well, we couldn't get an appraiser to go out and look at the thing, and we can't pay a claim. We're not supposed to pay a claim without having a formal appraisal. So how do we work around that? Well, we talked to the account, and you got to remember, this is Louisiana, so he was a guy who knew a guy who knew a guy who had some friends, and they all got on their ATVs and they drove them out in the swamp. I guess they were light enough they didn't sink down into the mud. They were able to take photos of this vehicle that's out there. There's no hauling it back out of the swamp. It's like 300 yards off the road. There's no hauling it back out there. But we were able to use those photos and say, okay, let's let's do the right thing for our client. And it became, we need to do this not because we're obligated to do it, but because it's the right thing to do. And so we tried to find ways to be flexible and do the right thing for the client.
Well, and that, for State National, that doing the right thing, whether, like you said, giving clients the flexibility to withdraw claims, to come back and file them later when they could be paid. For an insurance company, it seems it's a different approach to the business.
A little counterintuitive?
A little counterintuitive for an insurance company. But for us, anything that we've done, part of our DNA is recognizing the importance of the relationship that we have with our clients, and it also acknowledging the importance of the relationship that our clients have with their members. And at State National, we really kind of have two different constituency groups that we have to serve. First and foremost is kind of the member. If we can deliver consistently high quality service to the members, that reduces the friction for our credit union clients. That creates a win for us as an organization. So our ability to do that and how we do everything from how our account services teams are organized to how we organize the contact center, how we process phone calls, how we set up various queues, being able to respond to everyone within the credit union or the borrowers, the members, for us, that is what kind of sets us apart. And to be able to continue to do that day in and day out, meeting the SLAs, meeting the standards that we have in place, the standards that members expect and our credit unions expect. You mentioned we went from, having everybody working in the office to shifting over to where we had about 98% of our people working from home in the span of about a week. Tremendous effort put forth by our IT group with little to no notice. Our credit union partners were going through the same thing. And how do you rapidly adapt to that change and still be able to meet the expectations of the borrowers? We had one client in particular in Minnesota that before the end of March, they had changed their lending process to where they were closing loans in the parking lot. So people were able to pull up, close the loan, without ever getting out of their car. But that commitment to the members is the same thing that, we have to be able to live up to, that expectation.
Well, and there really wasn't a pause in the action for us, if you think about it, because not everywhere in the country had the same set of restrictions, if you will. And so we've still got clients that are expecting us to perform just as good as we did last week. And then we've got other clients that are like, yeah, we're not so worried about that now. We'll get back to you on that. But we couldn't let it slip. We couldn't let any of that slip because we didn't know who was who and where they were and how it was going to work. So we had to be prepared for the worst scenarios, if you will. And I think that's kind of something that we were able to do without losing that focus on that service.
Yeah, and really, as you move forward and thinking about, how do you rapidly transition to that environment when it's kind of a sprint, if you will? It's a short-term, flatten the curve, everybody, migrate to your home, let's work. It's turning into more now of a marathon. We've been doing this for 7-8 months now. Hopefully we're getting towards the end of it, but no one knows for sure. So it really is forcing us into a situation where we have to think about, okay, how do we manage this marathon? What do we need to focus on longer term? And part of that is a shift in how management thinks. I probably would have been one of the last guys to say, yeah, we can do all this from home and do it remotely and do it successfully.
I'll agree with that.
And that was always the kind of the linchpin for me is, can we do it and continue to deliver the way that everybody expects us to, the way I expect us to deliver? I have high standards just like our partners do. So for us to do that and think about what tools do we need as managers? What tools do we need to give our staff? And again, going back to what I talked about earlier, it's one thing to have a downward focused vision. It's another thing to be able to rapidly absorb information upward and respond quickly enough to make sure that everything's occurring the way it should. And asking our supervisors and managers, what tools do you need? How do we deliver on those tools? So,
I've always said for years, that you could have employees that work from home. I mean, sure, send them home for a day, let them work a day at home. That's an easy thing to do. But you could never have your supervisors work from home. You could never have your managers work from home, because it doesn't make sense to manage people when all your people are here in the office. How are you going to manage them from your house? But this kind of changed that, put it on its head, because now everybody's working from home. So now we do have to figure out, how do you manage people remotely? And so it's developing those new tools and new reports, new guidelines, new things to look at to make sure that the outputs are still there.
Yeah. And to me, it's again, I find this particularly an interesting time in history to be living through. My wife and I were talking a few weeks back, probably a couple of months back now, and just talking about how much change has impacted how you live day to day. And my comment was, it's really pretty cool. It's a pretty exciting time to be alive.
You're a sick man.
She reacted the same way. She kind of looked at me like I lost my mind. But if you think about it, we have taken 5 to 7 years worth of change and compressed it into about a 7-month window. And how people interact, how our offices are built and designed, how your homes are built and designed, all that is changing. And it will probably stay this way for 50, 100, 1,000 years. Who knows? I mean, this is an interesting inflection point that will change the way people interact with one another worldwide. So I think it's really an interesting time to be alive.
When do you think we're going to go back to shaking hands?
I don't
never,
know.
Right?
Yeah,
that seems really weird.
Yeah.
In a business environment, you meet somebody, you don't shake their hand.
Yeah. But even the stuff day to day, you go to a restaurant now, they don't hand you paper menus. They hand you the QR code. You scan it. If I owned a restaurant, I would never go back to printing menus. I mean, if you think about how much more flexible that makes their business model as people's tastes change, as the menu changes, how quick can you bring new items out to the marketplace to meet changing customer demand? So I think that, again, I think it's a really exciting time to be alive and to see a lot of stuff. And particularly as we talk about moving forward in the office environment, and I know we've got another poll that's coming up here in just a second. But as we talk about the office environment, I mentioned before we got started, there's so much information coming moment by moment. There was a meeting this morning with Steelcase and one of our people here, David Crawford, and talking about how offices are going to be designed. We've talked about it here. How do we go from the, more traditional office layout to one that enables some social distancing through creating neighborhoods? And the Steelcase thought was there's been a lot of focus placed on collaboration over the years. And really what has been, kind of neglected in that is concentration. 30% of the people in your office are introverts, so collaboration doesn't necessarily help them perform their job the best way possible. So, again, you've got these kind of push-pull dynamics on how you design an office space to meet the changing needs of your workforce, enable you to compete not only with talent like we had historically, but now I've also got to compete with people, that have the ability to work from home. Do I want them in the office? How often do I need them in the office? And if they can work from their home here, does it matter if they're 600 or 1,000 miles away? So
I'll tell you, I had one of my employees that moved back to Utah to be closer to her family during this, and she was able to do her job from Utah. I would have thought that was feasible before, but it's what happened. And you talked about ways to communicate. One of the things that I was surprised by forcing everybody to work remotely is the level of cooperation on the team actually went up, because it became a more intentional act. You had to schedule time to talk to each other. You had to schedule these things. And before, you just relied on driving by. I'm going to leave my office. I'm going to swing by so-and-so's cube. I'll have a short conversation. And, that satisfies that interaction piece. Hopefully I can answer any questions that they have while they're there. That can't happen now because they're not living at my house. So I have to be more intentional and schedule time to say, what's going on? How's it going? What can I do to help? what do you need? Here's what I need you to do. It became much more of an intentional act, and I think we're going to see that going forward. Do we need to stop here for the new poll? We're going to just keep going.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, we've worked together for a long time, and a lot of the people here, and it became very informal. And that was part of the thing that I enjoyed a lot, is that casual nature that we have, how we interact with each other, tease each other, and have fun. That did change going to working remote. And you're right, we did have to increase the intentionality of how we interact with people and build in some of that time to try to maintain those relationships. And WebEx and cameras have become an important part of that, as we've seen, for internally as well as externally. We interact with our clients, and that was one of the things that we learned from our clients. We've got a client advisory council that we participate in with a number of our clients. And our third quarter meeting, we had a chance to kind of touch base with that group and really learn a lot from them in how they were responding to these same opportunities. I'm not going to call them challenges, the same opportunities that we had had. And it was great to be able to share stories and learn from them what they're doing, and let them learn from each other. There was some stuff that they were doing that was really, really cool and very responsive and able to exceed member expectations. And having a forum where that can be shared, we were also able to document that as well in a white paper that will be available. But, we look forward to kind of reconnecting with our client advisory group again and learning from them and kind of catching up. Change is a constant. We continue to experience, we continue to live through it. The key in my mind, is being willing to embrace it, view it as an opportunity, do some research, like we said at the beginning of the call. There's a lot of stuff that we do instinctively that we've all learned from being in business, from being in the industry. It's a good refresher. Change is constant, and those organizations, I believe, that can embrace it and figure out how to respond more quickly will have the edge going forward. This will, like I said, shape the future for potentially a very long term. And again, the organizations that are going to succeed are the ones that are able to absorb this information, bottom up, have a strategic view on where they want to get to, and then be able to build an organization to get them there again. So, really appreciate the opportunity to speak with everybody today. Good talking to you again. And then if we have time for any questions or anything else, I think we would be happy to answer those. So.
Yes, thank you. We do have time for questions, so just give some people a little bit of time. If you want to type those into the chat or the Q&A, you can ask those, and I'll just give you a second to do so. So we do have one question, and I apologize, you can hear my roommate. One of the hazards of working from home, right, is that you can hear someone in the background sometimes. But one question is, did you have any specific technical things that you had to implement in order to kind of meet the needs that happened during all of these changes?
Yeah, there was a number of them. The first thing that pops into my mind is, as you say that, whenever this first came out, I forget what day the lockdown began, March 8th or March 9th. I don't know that there was any Chromebooks left within about a 50-mile radius of our building. We were out buying any kind of Chromebooks we could put our hands on in order to quickly transition our staff, like I said, to a work from home environment. A large number of us have laptops that we work with, but a lot of us didn't. And again, being able to accomplish that rapidly. We also went through and bought a whole bunch of webcams. I talked about the importance of that in staying connected initially with our staff and making sure that everything was okay with them and that they were able to transition away from the office, but also into roles that they're not accustomed to, teachers, caregivers, all of those experiences suddenly came in one culmination to everybody very rapidly. So we were doing constant polls with our staff to find out how things are going.
I was going to say, I can think of a couple other areas where we had to kind of figure out what the solution is. Our phone system. So we have phone groups, hunt groups. If they call this number, it goes to this group. And that phone system doesn't work in your normal, people don't have house phones anymore. So how do we get the phones to work? And we discovered, okay, you've got to plug it directly into your cable modem. If you've got cable, and well, what if I don't have cable? How do you deal with that? So, getting the right routers, getting the right modems, so that people could plug their phones in. That was a challenge. And we had several employees that had the right equipment, but it wasn't configured right. There was a switch on the back that needed to be moved. And so getting all those things together was somewhat difficult. And then initially we had a lot of people that said, no, I've got my own computer. I'm good. I don't need a Chromebook. And within about 3 to 4 weeks, they were back saying, yeah, I really need a Chromebook, because when we sent them home, they were under the impression that it's just going to be me working from home. But then come to find out their spouse is working from home, their kids are home, and now they've got to do schoolwork. And that one home computer isn't going to work for 4 people. Yeah. So we had a second round of laptop Chromebook type issues that surfaced after people had been home a while.
Yeah, and that's kind of focusing at it from an internal perspective. I mean, the other piece, as far as we were able to leverage a lot of that same technology, i.e. the cameras and everything, to try to maintain that closeness with our clients. Again, our business is built on relationships. Everything we do is geared towards enhancing or building or maintaining relationships with our clients. I mentioned earlier, it's the DNA of our organization, and it truly is. So being able to leverage some of that technology to try to maintain those relationships virtually was one of the things that was important to us. We also began pressing hard on, new technologies, or expanding, kind of recent technologies, i.e. Robotic process automation, texting, expanded the use of emails, pushing hard towards data extraction. So there was a lot of other technological projects that became even more important in this kind of virtual environment. So, I realize that was a long answer to your question, but yeah, there's definitely been some changes as far as the technology and how we've been able to leverage it in this environment. Absolutely. Good question.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great answer. And then kind of on the flip side, it is a challenging time, but as you mentioned, also kind of exciting, lots of changes. And you had the example of the menu at the restaurant. So are there other areas of, future opportunity that you've kind of seen popping up that you may not have noticed before?
Yeah, I think there is, and we're all sitting here participating in one today. This is a new thing for me personally to do as far as the WebExes. Not something that I would say is natural to my communication style. But we think that this will take an increasingly important role going forward as an organization, as a way to communicate things that are going on, but also be able to share knowledge and gain knowledge from our clients and everything, as far as what are they faced with, what opportunities do they have, and then it'll give us an opportunity to kind of figure out how can we learn from it, 2, how can we help it expand their capabilities to meet the needs of their members. So definitely that is a new thing for us. I think that'll last.
And I think we're probably on the cusp of seeing a lot more technology solutions for problems we didn't know we had a year ago. So this kind of spurs innovation in and of itself. I was thinking earlier this week, had this happened 10 years ago, I don't know what we would have done, because the technology wasn't there to support a remote operation. I mean, you could have done a few people, but it wouldn't have done it wide scale like we've done it today. So we're kind of living in the right period of time for this to have happened, to be able to adapt to it. But I think in 5 years, we're going to look back and go, man, we had no idea what was possible.
Yeah, agreed. And that kind of touches on, I think this change will absolutely drive innovation. And we've seen it with how a lot of businesses have responded, how our credit union partners have responded. I think that, this will be an accelerant for innovation at this point. So again, that's one of the things that I think is exciting and a good opportunity for us to kind of stay focused on. Instead of focusing on the loss of normalcy that we had, stay focused on the innovation and the direction that we can go from here.
And I'll just give you, sometimes we look at the big things. Sometimes it's really the little things that wind up impacting us the most. I had a call with one of my employees this morning, and we needed to look at a file, an Excel file. And in the old days, I would have been on the phone going, okay, do you have the file pulled up? Okay, I'm in cell C15 right now. And are you looking at that formula? And today I was like, hey, why don't we hop onto my WebEx and I'll share my screen, and then you can see exactly what I'm doing as I do it. And it just made what would normally have taken in the old days a 3 or 4 hour session to get through everything we did in an hour. And it just, that's very impactful and for my employee and for me, because that's a lot less time for me to have to spend training. So yeah. It's those little things sometimes that make huge differences. And 7 months ago, I would never have thought to use WebEx for any of that.
Well, 7 months ago, we were using WebEx to deliver what we call program reviews to a number of our clients. And kind of going through since COVID began, we've shifted all of it to that same method to where it is a way to still be able to maintain that visual face-to-face kind of relationship, but convey sometimes complex information in a way that makes it very understandable, because you are sharing it rather than trying to explain it without any visual representation. So, I think that, again, I think these are things that will change how we do business going forward.
Again, thank you. This white paper, we are sending out the link to in the follow-up email. Is there anything you wanted to share any more about this information that we'll be sending out?
Nothing specific other than, if some of our client advisory council members are participating in this WebEx, really appreciate your input and would like to thank you specifically for kind of helping us through that process and giving us the opportunity to learn from you. And sorry we weren't able to do the face-to-face meetings. Really look forward to being able to see you whenever we can and having a nice meal. But again, thank you for your help in producing that white paper.
Well, thank you both again for joining us. This was a great session, and thank you all for attending. The recording will be sent out along with the link to the slides and to this white paper in a follow-up email, so be on the lookout for that. And check out Q's for more digital learning options. And thank you all for being here. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, I do see, if you've got a little bit of time, and if she hasn't left yet, I do see a question that just came through.
Sure. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Can you identify any processes or activities that developed because of the quick environment change?
I will say, I'll give you a minute to think. There's definitely been some changing as far as the reporting and how we build departmental dashboards or report that get kind of escalated. That was something that specifically changes. There was a real hard focus on what information do we need to look at that can be distilled down as it moves up the organization to provide people with the insight that they need to make decisions on how to provide direction to the business. So the reporting became increasingly important in kind of focusing on what are the metrics that really drive the business? What are the handful of items for a specific department? What are the handful of items that we need to monitor, not monthly or quarterly like you used to be able to do, but what are the things that need to be monitored daily or hourly to make sure that things are occurring the way they should? A manual process that we have here is, we process mail. I always tell people what we do is really simple. We match insurance documents to loans. It sounds simple till you try to do it. There's a tremendous amount of transactions that occur every month, well in excess of 1.5 million transactions. A large number of those are paper documents. So we had to be very intentional on how do you process those documents in a way that ensures they're going to be handled timely and accurately. So, those are a couple of processes I think that were, kind of rethought as we went through the process.
Yeah, and we're still on we're still in the process of redesigning some things. One of the situations that I had with my underwriting department is some of the reports that we rely on are system generated, but they only print here in the home office. You can't print them remotely. You have to have a network printer to print them. And so it requires me to have somebody here in the home office every day to be able to run the reports that my remote people need to do their jobs. And so one of the things that's in development is the ability to print all those things to PDF or to a CSV file or some other way to get the document put out on the network drive where my remote employees can just go pick it up.
Yeah.
So it's not always, there's not always a solution right out of the box. Sometimes you have to figure out, okay, where are the real bottlenecks now and what can we do to solve those?
Yeah, and a good example of that, an existing technology that, personally I've used a fair amount, but we had always been somewhat hesitant to use it in our business, is DocuSign. That's something you mentioned earlier. I mean, while we can be very flexible, we are very regulated organization, and we operate in a highly regulated industry. So there's a lot of documents and contracts and addendums that need to be signed. Whereas normally in the office, you get a stack of documents and you just, kind of go through them and sign them. Being able to do that in a remote environment via DocuSign is something that I've been a huge advocate for. I love DocuSign, and I'm glad to be able to see that it's taken a role in our business, and also how we work with our clients on it. So we're kind of using it internally and then pushing it out to our clients as well. So I think that's an existing platform that we were able to integrate within our processes pretty quickly.
And one of the advantages of that is exactly where that document is.
Yeah,
it's good whose desk it's on.
Yeah.
Whereas before it's like, well, where is that?
Yep.
So it does provide more visibility into the process as well.
Yeah. So a couple of examples.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
After January.
So I didn't see another one come in, so I think we are done. Thank you again for sticking around and answering, and for the session.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Focus on